What happens when a respected news anchor walks into what should be a friendly late-night interview, only to discover the host has a completely different agenda? Chris Hayes thought he was stepping onto Jimmy Kimmel Live for a standard promotional segment about his latest book on climate policy. Instead, he found himself trapped in what can only be described as a political ambush that would end with security escorting him off the set. This is the untold story of one of the most shocking confrontations in late-night television history. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really motivated Jimmy's behavior that night. The evening started normally enough. Chris Hayes arrived at the El Capitan Entertainment Center in Hollywood around 4 in the afternoon for the standard pre-show prep. His publicist had arranged this appearance months in advance as part of the book tour for his latest work, a comprehensive analysis of renewable energy policy in America. Hayes had done hundreds of these promotional appearances over the years, and Kimmel's show was considered one of the friendlier venues for authors and political figures alike. The comedian had built his reputation on playful banter rather than gotcha journalism, making it an ideal platform for discussing complex policy issues in an accessible way. What Hayes didn't know was that Jimmy Kimmel had spent the previous week stewing over comments the MSNBC host had made during a panel discussion on another network. During that appearance, Hayes had criticized what he called the trivialization of serious political discourse in entertainment media, arguing that comedy shows sometimes did more harm than good by reducing complex issues to punchlines. While Hayes hadn't mentioned Kimmel by name, industry insiders knew the comments were partially directed at late-night hosts who dabbled in political commentary without the journalistic background to handle such topics responsibly. Kimmel had taken these comments personally, viewing them as an attack on his credibility and influence. In the days leading up to Hayes' appearance, the comedian had reportedly told his writing staff that he intended to confront the news anchor directly about what he perceived as intellectual elitism. Several staffers later described an unusually tense atmosphere in the writer's room as Kimmel worked on questions that seemed designed more to embarrass than entertain. One writer, speaking anonymously, revealed that Kimmel had become increasingly agitated during script meetings, repeatedly returning to Hayes' comments and muttering about people who thought they were better than everyone else. The pre-interview process should have been Hayes' first warning sign. Typically, guests and hosts have a brief conversation before taping to discuss talking points and ensure smooth conversation flow. Instead, Kimmel was unusually curt during their backstage meeting, offering only vague assurances about covering the book while asking probing questions about Hayes' views on the role of entertainment in politics. Hayes later told colleagues that something felt off about the interaction, but he attributed Kimmel's behavior to pre-show nerves or personal distractions. The conversation lasted barely 5 minutes, with Kimmel cutting it short by claiming he needed to review his monologue, though several crew members noted that he had already done his final monologue rehearsal an hour earlier. During this brief backstage encounter, Kimmel's demeanor was notably different from his usual pre-show persona. Instead of the warm, collaborative approach he typically took with guests, he maintained a cold distance that made Hayes increasingly uncomfortable. When Hayes attempted to share some interesting statistics about renewable energy adoption that might make for good television moments, Kimmel barely listened, instead scrolling through his phone with obvious disinterest. The disconnect was so apparent that Hayes' publicist, who had been present for dozens of these pre-interviews, later described it as one of the most awkward interactions she had ever witnessed. As showtime approached, Hayes took his place in the green room alongside other guests scheduled for that evening's taping. The atmosphere was typical of any late-night show, with production assistants bustling about and the warm-up comedian testing jokes with the studio audience. Hayes reviewed his talking points one final time, focusing on key statistics about renewable energy adoption and the economic benefits of green technology investments. He had prepared several engaging anecdotes about his research process, including interviews with solar panel installers and wind farm engineers, stories that usually resonated well with television audiences who appreciated the human element behind policy discussions. The warning signs continued as Hayes was escorted to the stage. Normally, hosts greet their guests warmly before the cameras roll, engaging in light conversation to put everyone at ease. Instead, Kimmel barely acknowledged Hayes's presence, offering only a perfunctory handshake while reviewing note cards with an intensity that seemed unusual for someone known for his relaxed interview style. The studio audience, sensing the tension, grew quieter than usual as the show's theme music began to play. Several audience members later reported feeling an unusual energy in the room, as if everyone could sense that something was about to go wrong. Hayes, still operating under the assumption that this would be a standard promotional interview, tried to engage Kimmel in casual conversation during the commercial breaks. He mentioned how much he enjoyed the comedian's recent monologue about healthcare policy, attempting to find common ground between their different approaches to political commentary. Kimmel's response was a non-committal grunt, followed by him turning away to speak with his producer in hushed tones. This behavior was so unlike Kimmel's usual gregarious personality that even the camera operators began exchanging concerned glances. The production staff, many of whom had worked on the show for years, recognized that something was seriously amiss. Kimmel's typical pre-show routine involved joking with crew members, checking in with his band leader, and generally maintaining the upbeat atmosphere that had become his trademark. Instead, he sat silently at his desk, occasionally glaring in Hayes' direction while furiously scribbling notes on his interview cards. One camera operator later described the tension as palpable, noting that even the usually chatty audience seemed subdued as they waited for the show to begin. As the cameras rolled and Kimmel delivered his standard monologue, Hayes sat waiting in the guest chair, still unaware of what was about to unfold. The comedian's opening jokes seemed sharper than usual, with several pointed references to media, personalities who thought they were smarter than everyone else. The studio audience laughed along, but several crew members later reported sensing an underlying hostility in Kimmel's delivery that was unusual even for his typically sarcastic style. His usual timing felt off, as if he was rushing through material to get to something else, something that had been consuming his thoughts for days. When Kimmel finally turned to introduce his guest, the smile on his face didn't reach his eyes. The transformation was jarring for those who knew him well, his typically genuine enthusiasm replaced by something that looked more like a predator sizing up prey. Please welcome Chris Hayes, host of All In on MSNBC and author of the new book about climate policy that I'm sure 12 people will read, he said, his voice dripping with barely concealed disdain. The insult was so unexpected and unprofessional that several audience members audibly gasped, while others looked around uncertainly, unsure whether this was supposed to be part of the entertainment. Hayes, caught off guard by the unnecessarily harsh introduction, managed a polite smile while processing what had just happened. Years of live television experience had taught him to roll with unexpected moments, but this felt different, more personal and deliberately cruel. The audience's laughter felt forced, and several people in the front rows exchanged uncomfortable glances. Even the band seemed uncertain about how to react, with the usual musical sting falling flat in the suddenly tense atmosphere. "Thanks for having me, Jimmy," Hayes responded, attempting to steer the conversation toward safer ground while maintaining his professional composure. "I'm excited to talk about the book and some of the really promising developments in renewable energy. There are some fascinating stories about communities that have completely transformed their local economies through green technology initiatives." But Kimmel had no intention of discussing renewable energy or any other policy topic. Instead, he leaned back in his chair with the predatory grin of someone about to spring a carefully planned trap. "Actually, Chris, I wanted to talk about something else first," Kimmel said, his tone shifting to something resembling interrogation mode. The change was so dramatic that it felt like watching someone remove a mask to reveal their true face underneath. You were on another show recently where you had some interesting things to say about comedy and politics. You seem to suggest that people like me don't have the intellectual capacity to discuss serious issues. I'm curious about that." The studio fell silent as the audience realized they were witnessing something far more confrontational than the usual late-night banter. The uncomfortable quiet stretched on for several seconds, broken only by the sound of someone in the audience shifting nervously in their seat. Hayes, now fully aware that this wasn't going to be a standard interview, straightened in his chair and took a moment to compose his thoughts. He could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes focused on him, waiting to see how he would respond to what was clearly a deliberate provocation. "I think there might be some misunderstanding about what I said, Jimmy. I was talking about the general trend of complex issues being oversimplified for entertainment value, not attacking any individual. The concern I raised was about the responsibility that comes with having a platform that reaches millions of people every night." His voice remained calm and professional, but those who knew him well could detect the subtle shift in his demeanor. That indicated he was preparing for a more serious discussion than he had anticipated. Kimmel wasn't satisfied with this diplomatic response, and his facade of professional courtesy began to crumble completely. "Oh, I think I understood perfectly," he shot back, his voice rising slightly as his true feelings began to surface. "You think people like me are just clowns who shouldn't be trusted with important topics. You think your journalism degree makes you better than those of us who came up through comedy clubs and had to actually connect with real people instead of hiding behind fancy vocabulary and academic theories." The accusation was delivered with such venom that several audience members visibly recoiled, while others looked around as if seeking confirmation that this was really happening. The personal nature of the attack caught Hayes off guard, but he maintained his composure while processing the depth of hostility that Kimmel was displaying. It was clear that this wasn't a spontaneous outburst, but rather the culmination of days or perhaps weeks of building resentment. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, and Hayes felt the weight of every eye in the studio focused on him. He had two choices: back down and allow Kimmel to dominate the conversation, or stand his ground and risk escalating the confrontation. Hayes, drawing on years of experience handling difficult interviews and challenging guests, chose to defend his position with measured professionalism. "Jimmy, I respect what you do, and I think comedy has an important role in political discourse," Hayes said, his voice gaining strength as he found his footing in this unexpected debate. "When you present political information to millions of viewers, there's a responsibility that comes with that platform. Comedy can be a powerful tool for highlighting absurdity and making complex issues accessible, but it can also mislead people about serious topics that deserve careful consideration. My concern isn't about intelligence or education. It's about the difference between entertainment and journalism, and making sure audiences understand which one they're getting." The audience, now fully engaged in what felt more like a political debate than an entertainment interview, began to murmur among themselves as they processed this unusually serious exchange. Kimmel's face flushed red as he leaned forward aggressively, abandoning any pretense of maintaining his television persona. The transformation was complete now. The affable comedian replaced by someone who seemed genuinely angry and personally offended. "So now you're saying I mislead people? You're saying that millions of Americans who watch this show are too stupid to tell the difference between a joke and news?" His voice had risen to near shouting level, and several crew members could be seen exchanging worried glances off camera. The sound technician actually reached for his controls, concerned that the audio levels were becoming problematic. "Maybe the problem isn't that I'm too dumb to discuss politics. Maybe the problem is that you're too pretentious to connect with actual human beings who don't have Ivy League degrees and cable news contracts." The personal attacks were now coming, fast and furious, each one more inflammatory than the last. Hayes found himself in the surreal position of being publicly berated on national television by someone who had invited him as a guest. The audience seemed split between those who were enjoying the unexpected drama and others who appeared genuinely uncomfortable with the hostile turn the conversation had taken. Some people were actually looking toward the exits, as if considering whether they should leave, while others were recording the confrontation on their phones despite the show's policy against such behavior. The tension in the studio had reached a breaking point as both men glared at each other across the coffee table that suddenly seemed inadequate as a barrier between them. The atmosphere was electric with hostility, and even the usually professional crew members were struggling to maintain their composure while witnessing this unprecedented breakdown of television decorum. Hayes, maintaining his composure despite the increasingly hostile environment, attempted one final diplomatic approach, though his patience was clearly being tested to its limits. "Jimmy, I'm not attacking you personally, and I'm certainly not attacking your audience," Hayes said, his voice steady but with an underlying edge that suggested his professional calm was requiring considerable effort to maintain. "I have tremendous respect for the intelligence of your viewers, which is exactly why I think all of us in media, myself included, need to be thoughtful about how we present complex information. This isn't about education or background, it's about being honest with people about what we're offering them, whether it's entertainment, analysis, or straight news reporting." But Kimmel was beyond reason at this point, his face now completely red with anger, as years of perceived slights and professional insecurities came pouring out in front of a live audience. "Don't patronize me with your thoughtful media analysis," he snarled, abandoning any pretense of maintaining his television persona. "You came on my show, you sit in my chair, and you have the audacity to lecture me about responsibility while selling a book that nobody asked for about policies that will never work. You want to talk about misleading people? How about promising them that renewable energy is going to save the world while ignoring the economic reality that most families are facing right now?" The audience had gone completely silent, with many people looking around nervously as if seeking reassurance that this was still supposed to be entertainment. The attack on his book seemed to be the moment when Hayes realized that this confrontation was about more than just professional disagreement. This was personal for Kimmel in a way that went far beyond anything Hayes had said in his previous media appearances. Hayes could see the genuine anger and hurt in Kimmel's eyes, but he also recognized that this kind of public attack was completely inappropriate, regardless of whatever personal grievances might be driving it. Hayes finally began to show signs of his own frustration, though he maintained the controlled demeanor that had served him well throughout his broadcasting career. "If you weren't interested in discussing the book, why did you book me as a guest? What exactly did you hope to accomplish here?" His voice remained controlled, but there was steel in it now that hadn't been there at the beginning of the interview. "This isn't journalism, Jimmy. This is just public humiliation for your own entertainment. You're proving exactly the point I was trying to make about the difference between serious discourse and performative confrontation." That accusation proved to be the final straw for Kimmel, who seemed to lose the last vestiges of his self-control. Standing up abruptly from his desk, he pointed an accusatory finger at Hayes with such force that his hand was visibly shaking. "You want to see public humiliation? You want to see what happens when someone with actual comedic timing takes apart your pretentious worldview piece by piece?" His voice had become genuinely threatening, and several audience members in the front rows actually leaned back in their seats, as if physically recoiling from the hostility radiating from the stage. "I've been doing this for 20 years, connecting with real people who have real problems, while you sit in your studio talking to other journalists about policy papers that nobody reads." The personal nature of the attacks had escalated to a level that was shocking even by the standards of heated political debate. Hayes, recognizing that the situation had moved far beyond salvageable, also stood up with the dignity that had characterized his entire career in journalism. "I think we're done here," he said calmly, beginning to remove his microphone with steady hands despite the chaos surrounding him. "This isn't what I agreed to when I accepted your invitation, and it's not serving your audience or mine." But Kimmel wasn't finished with his tirade, and as Hayes attempted to leave, the host continued his verbal assault with increasing intensity. "That's right! Run away when someone calls you out on your elitist garbage!" Kimmel shouted, his voice carrying across the now completely silent studio, with an echo that seemed to amplify the ugliness of the moment. "Go back to your cable news bubble where everyone agrees with you and tells you how smart you are. Go back to talking to other people who think they're better than the rest of us, while the real world falls apart around you." The insults continued as Hayes walked toward the edge of the stage, his dignity intact, but his patience clearly exhausted. The audience watched in stunned silence as what should have been a routine book promotion devolved into something resembling a public breakdown. What happened next shocked everyone present and would become the defining moment of this unprecedented confrontation. As Hayes reached the side of the stage, Kimmel actually began following him, continuing his rant in front of the cameras and the studio audience with complete disregard for professional boundaries or basic decency. "Don't you dare walk away from me while I'm talking to you," he yelled, his behavior now completely unprofessional and borderline unhinged. Several crew members moved closer, clearly concerned about where this confrontation was heading, and whether they needed to intervene to prevent the situation from escalating into something even worse. Hayes turned back one final time, his voice cutting through Kimmel's shouting with the calm authority that had made him one of the most respected voices in television journalism. "This is exactly the kind of behavior that proves my point about the difference between entertainment and journalism. A real interviewer would ask questions and listen to answers, not throw a tantrum when their guest doesn't say what they want to hear. This is what happens when ego takes precedence over professionalism." With that final statement, delivered with devastating precision, he continued walking off the stage while Kimmel's shouting grew even louder behind him, the host's voice becoming increasingly shrill and desperate. The situation deteriorated further when Kimmel, apparently unwilling to let Hayes leave without having the last word, attempted to follow him into the backstage area. This was the moment when the confrontation crossed the line from television drama into something genuinely concerning for everyone involved. At this point, security personnel who had been watching the situation unfold finally intervened, physically, restraining the host while Hayes was escorted out of the building by a different exit. The studio audience sat in stunned silence as production assistants scrambled to figure out how to salvage what remained of the show, with many people openly staring at the empty stage where moments before they had witnessed one of the most shocking breakdowns in late-night television history. The entire confrontation lasted less than 15 minutes, but it felt like hours to everyone present. Hayes left the building without speaking to reporters, maintaining his professional composure even as he processed what had just occurred. Kimmel eventually returned to finish the show with his remaining guests, though eyewitnesses described him as visibly shaken and uncharacteristically subdued for the rest of the taping. The segment with Hayes was never aired, and both parties declined to comment publicly about what had transpired, though industry insiders spent weeks analyzing every detail of the confrontation. What started as a routine book promotion had devolved into one of the most shocking confrontations in late-night television history, all because a host couldn't handle criticism and chose personal attack over professional discourse. The incident revealed the ugly side of celebrity ego and the dangers of mixing entertainment with serious political discussion without the proper foundation, temperament, or respect for the responsibilities that come with having a platform that reaches millions of people every night. So what do you think really drove Jimmy Kimmel to such extreme behavior that night? Was it genuine offense at Hayes' comments, or something deeper about the insecurity that comes with being taken seriously in political discourse? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more behind-the-scenes stories from the world of television and politics.